Hello, everyone, and as always, welcome back to Strategy Gaming Dojo, or welcome for the first time. If you've never been to the channel before, you may not know that I have an affinity for Gary Grigsby games. If you have been to the channel, you know that. We are currently playing War in the East and War in the Pacific, but I did want to make a tutorial for War in the West. They are sibling games. They are similar in many functions and fashions, but they are different enough that I think that it warrants doing a tutorial on this one, War in the West. And because War in the Pacific and War in the East are such iconic games of wargaming, arguably the two best ever made, I feel like War in the West sometimes doesn't get its due. It is also an excellent game, and if you're interested in this theater of the war, the Western War, whether it be in France, in the Mediterranean, Sicily, Italy, you can't find a better game than this that recreates the situations and the scenarios on the ground in the West. And so let's dive right in and start talking about this game and how it's similar and how it's a little bit different than those others. Or if you're brand new to Gary Grigsby games in general, I'll take you through. Now, the way I learn, and so the way I do these tutorials is I need to get my arms around kind of the big picture before I can get down into the nitty-gritty specifics. And so I like to start from the ground floor, and that is right on the start screen. I like to go through everything and get it straight in my mind how this all works, how the mechanics of the game work, and then build from there. Once I understand, kind of those basics and the ground floor of it, I feel like we can start building up. At least that's how I learn, and hopefully it'll be effective in helping you learn the game because I think you'll really enjoy it if you watch all of these. Now I'm going to try to keep these fairly bite-sized, at least for me and at least for Grigsby Games, and keep these 30 or 40 minutes so you can watch them fairly quickly, or you can flip to the one that interests you, or maybe a part of the game you don't understand quite as well. So anyway, let's jump right in. On the introduction screen, it's a very simple introduction screen or start screen. You pick who's going to play the Axis and who's going to play the Allies. In this case, we're going to play the Allies. I'm going to play one of the introductory scenarios for the tutorial just to show you different concepts. They have a couple of the scenarios that are specifically kind of built for that. Now, they don't have kind of an in-game tutorial, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for me, I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't be watching this if they did. But the point being is we're going to play the Allies and we're going to play Operation Husky. But we'll get to that in a second. Now, difficulty level, there are 5 difficulty levels. We've got it on normal here. You could also have it on challenging. You could have it on hard. You could have it on impossible. We could do easy, but let's do normal. So there are 5 different ones there. Normal is what we'll pick. Now in the game options, I feel like sometimes people gloss over them, but really they're kind of important in understanding certain concepts of the game. So I'm just going to go through them very quickly. Now, of course, we've already picked that we're the Allies, and the computer, the AI, will be the Axis. Now, I don't think it's fair to the British. They just show an American flag here. Obviously, the British were certainly locked arm in arm with the Americans when it came to the Western Front, specifically northern France, but also through the Italian peninsula and the attack on Sicily. But anyway, we'll take the game for what it is. They put the American flag up here. All right. Fog of War. Well, I always play with Fog of War on, but because this is a tutorial and we're really just trying to learn here, I'm not trying to win. Well, I always try to win. Who am I kidding? But we will leave the Fog of War off and make it a little unfair to the computer. I guess that'll make it easier for us to win. That's fine. But Fog of War, it's always fun to play with it on. It makes it more challenging. Lock headquarters support. Now, this is one of those things that I'm talking about where it really goes to a core concept of the game. And if you're new to these games, or maybe even if you have played, the other Grigsby games, you still maybe don't understand this concept, and I understand that. Basically, in this game, it's a divisional level game. So the counters that you see on the map, generally speaking, are divisions. And you move divisions about, they attack. Those are your units that you're dealing with. But that's not necessarily very realistic, right? I mean, there were all sorts of smaller units within both the British, American, and German and Italian armies. And those, what makes up a division? Well, it's battalions, 2 to 4 battalions, or 2 to 4 regiments, or mini companies make up those. And so you have these smaller units, and usually, or I say usually, many times they can be very specific types of units. Okay, and so a battalion, especially, is a very usually a specialized kind of unit. So you will have an artillery battalion, or you would have a very specialized machine gun battalion that would be attached to a division. um, and how do you recreate that? Well, the developers of this game have made what are called support units. And support units don't actually have counters on the map. And you may say, oh, okay, well, I mean, how are they represented then? Well, the way this game and other Grigsby games represent them is by this concept of a support unit. Okay, so let's just take a single artillery battalion. That is a support unit. It will be attached to a corps headquarters. And so, if you're not familiar with the hierarchy of the Army during this time or the Army in general, you have these smaller units. Companies make regiments and brigades. Okay? Regiments and brigades make divisions. This is on the divisional level. Divisions make up a corps. So 3 or 4, well, it could be 2 divisions, 3 divisions, 4 divisions put together make a corps. In this game, headquarters units are at the core start at the corps level. Okay, so you'll have 2, 3, 4 divisions that all form a corps that's represented as an HQ counter. Okay, and that counter has direct command and control over those divisions. So the way this game deals with these battalions, which you can kind of think of as like free agents, they can attach wherever you tell them to attach. They will attach at corps headquarters, generally speaking. Okay, and when they're at the corps headquarters, that your general at that corps headquarters can push them out to the divisions under its command to help with specific tasks. So let's say you're assaulting a position and you need artillery. And that corps headquarters may have 3 or 10 or 2 or none artillery battalions that are attached to it. You don't see them on the map, you'll see them on a list at the corps headquarters. They will push those out to the divisions, and those divisions can then use that artillery as needed. And that really goes to how good generals you have. They have to pass dice rolls. This game is, the greatest board game ever made, only on the PC and can only be done on the PC, right? But they have to pass certain dice rolls, and then those battalions go out and help your divisions. But we'll get into all of that. Let's get back to what this means. Locking headquarters support means that all of those battalions are locked in place. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose of them. One of the great things about them in this game and in War in the East is that they're very flexible. You can take them, they don't have to stick with one division, right? Because a division may do an attack one turn, but may be in wide open country the next turn, and you don't need artillery. Well, with these battalions, by them being attached to your corps headquarters, or one level up from that, the Army headquarters, they can be pushed down to divisions that actually need it. And that's kind of the core concept of support units is they're very flexible. So we do not want them locked. We want to control those. And we'll go into how to do that. I know that it can sound like a very complicated concept if you're new to this, but it actually adds a lot of flexibility and realism to the game. So we are not going to lock those. We are going to control them and push them where we want them to be. East front control. Now, this is something that's very specific to war in the West. Obviously, you have the elephant in the room, which is that the Germans, the Axis, the Germans, kind of writ large, but the Axis, are also fighting the greatest and biggest land battle in the history of humankind on the Eastern Front while they're also fighting this war. Well, how do you recreate that? And how do you create division shifting fronts? Production and supply that needs to go east, or does it need to go west? Well, let's just say that you forgot about the Eastern Front and just said, well, we're not going to deal with that in war in the West, right? The Germans would absolutely overrun the Allies because they would have all of the manpower, production, supply, fuel that they're sending east. They would have all of that available in France and in Italy and would just swamp the Allies, the American and the British. But that's not the case. As a matter of fact, in some cases, they were pushing two-thirds to three-quarters of all of their stuff, whether that be manpower, fuel, supply, to the Eastern Front. Okay, and so they had kind of their bare bones skeleton crew, no pun intended, over on the Western Front. All right, so how do you recreate that as a developer? What they came up for this game is called East Front, an East Front box. Now we have this checked, and what that will mean is that the German player or the Axis, I keep saying German. When I say German, I mean Axis really, but you think of them as being the Germans, but it was also the Italians, the Hungarians, the Romanians, the Czechs. Um, they have more flexibility when this box is checked because they can move things out of the east front box and move it to the west front if they want to. And you may say, well, why wouldn't they just move it all over there? Because the game, I think they did a very clever thing, which is they have to keep a minimum amount in that east front box or the Soviets began to advance faster towards Berlin, and Berlin can actually fall faster than it did historically, which was August of 45. So basically they have to do this balancing act. Now, this gives them control of doing that balancing act. Let's say that you're playing an AI player or a human player and they're, beating the snot out of you on the Western Front. They can put more things in the Eastern in the Eastern box and slow down the Soviets even more. But if you start doing well and they start moving things over to counter you as the Allies, they can suffer a real penalty from that by the Soviets moving faster towards Berlin. And that's just kind of simulated. I mean, obviously, it's abstracted, but I think it's a very clever mechanic to give the Axis player a bit of flexibility um, while also penalizing them if they try to take too much of an advantage of that. Now, we set the difficulty level to normal. What does that mean practically? Well, it goes to these five different levels, okay? Morale level. Now, combat units in this game and in War in the East both, there are three important things when it comes to your combat units. That's experience, fatigue, and morale. Those are the three major components of how well your ground units fight. Of course, it matters how many men and guns and tanks that they have, but when you're just talking about the base level of how they would fight given the material they have, the three things, again, are, how fatigued they are, how much experience they have, and their morale level. When we're on normal, it's the base level they would normally have. But let's kick it up to challenging. What happens? We're challenging ourself, right? We're the allies. So now the Axis is going to get 110% of their normal base level of morale. So if their morale was normally 80, they would get another 10%. It would be 88 as their base level. Okay. And us as the allies, if our morale level was, I'm not going to be a mathematician here. Let's make it easy. If our morale level was 100 as a base level normally under just normal conditions, if we're playing in challenging, it's 90. Okay. And you can see hard pops it up to 125 and 80. Impossible 150 to 70. Let's not do that. That doesn't sound good. Back to normal 100. So what are these other things? So you have morale, which is one of the three major components of how your units fight. You have fort build level. Now, in this game and War in the East, units that sit in a hex start to build natural fortifications. That makes sense, right? If those guys are there for a week, they're not just sitting around, playing cards all the time and smoking cigarettes. Now, it's possible they're doing that, but they would also be building natural fortifications. And so every hex kind of has a base level fort level, kind of, based on the terrain and whatnot. But then units that are in that hex, as long as they stay or they're sitting there in that hex at the end of the turn, will start to build natural fort levels. And that's something that you have to kind of overcome before you even fight the troops in that hex, okay? Uh, Again, when we kick this up, fort level will be at 110% of what it would be normally, uh, and then ours as the allies goes down. And so this is really, what the practical effects of your difficulty level are. Logistics, just like every other war in history, logistics are king. Getting food, fuel, supply out to your bullets out to your troops is the most important thing you can do. So food, fuel, and bullets. That's what you have to get out there. And this logistics level, there's all kinds of logistics in this game. Railways are very important. I'm not going to say they're as important as they are in the Eastern Front, but they're still very important for moving material and men. And you can have railways that get clogged because you're trying to move too many men down them, and you don't get enough supply or fuel. Um, the converse, I guess, is true. You can have so much supply going through, you can't move armies where you need to. And so logistics, very important part of this game. You can handicap yourself and give the access and advantage if you want to. Again, we're playing normal. Transport level, same kind of idea. You want to transport troops around. You move them here, move them there, whether that be by boat or plane or railway. This gives an advantage or a disadvantage, as it may be. Uh, with transport level. Now, roads in this game are rated. Each hex, you don't see roads on the map, but each hex has a road rating. It can be poor, it can be good, it can be excellent, and that will kind of determine how fast things can move through that hex. Admin level, this again kind of goes to logistics. Your generals have an admin score, and so they have to beat that admin score in dice rolls, and this would just give an advantage or a disadvantage or a penalty based on your difficulty rating. What is this up here? No beachhead victory points. This is something very unique to this game. It tries to encourage the allied player into not just sitting back and doing nothing but a bombing campaign. Air war is incredibly important in this game. It really is the backbone of the Allied war effort. If you look at both armies in the Grand Campaign and you just compare the armies, they're sort of evenly matched, really. It's not like the Eastern Front where the Germans have a huge advantage at the start, and then by the end, the Soviets have a huge advantage. In On the Western Front, it's kind of an even duel on the ground. Where the Allies have an incredible advantage is in the air, and such a the largest component of this game is in the air, and they want to encourage the Allied player not to sit back and just do bombing. And so they give you a penalty in the Grand Campaign if you have not made a beachhead landing that occupies 6 hexes of either Italy or France by February of 1944. So you would get a 400-point penalty. If that had not happened, you can make it cumulative. You also have a July 44 option here. You could do both if you want and give the Allies penalties from a victory point perspective if they have not made a beachhead landing. I think it's good because it encourages the Allied player to actually be offensive and move forward rather than bombing everything to smithereens and hoping to walk through the ashes. That's really the point of this. Optional city victory points kind of speaks for itself. You can give some optional victory points for certain cities. Preferences, you get the idea. You've played a game, you've played this game or some other game before and figured out how to do scroll speed and whatnot. I won't really go through these other than to say two kind of important points to me anyway. Um, well, maybe there's a couple more than that, but the two most important over here on the left side of the screen is I would always show these things, move path and allowed movement. This is if you have selected a counter, you can move your cursor out and you can see where that counter could move and how many movement points it's going to take. I think it just makes the game so much easier to play when you can see those things. And so I would always recommend having those on and the show army front colors because ultimately it's nice to know under which army a unit is. You can kind of trace back the chain of command very easily that way. I don't know. That's just my recommendation. Over here, I would say the third thing is this unit values display type, name, but unit counter info here, CV and move. I always play this and War in the East in this mode. What does this mean if you're not familiar with the game? Combat value. This is a very generic general number that tells you how strong the unit is. Let's say it's 15 and you see one of your allied units next to you that's a 7. Generally speaking, that 15 is going to be a little bit more than double the strength when it gets into combat as the unit next to it. Now, it's not perfect, and I know some people say, well, that's not exactly right because this and that and whatever can affect it. Of course it can. That's the point of the game. Different terrain can affect it, fort levels can affect ultimate combat value, and everything goes into this big witch's brew and comes out with adjusted combat value. But the base combat value, you want to see that on your counter to get a general idea of how strong that unit is. Move is how many movement points that counter still has. Generally speaking, a fully fueled and supplied infantry unit has 16 movement points at the start of a turn. A motorized unit in the same condition, fully fueled, fully supplied, fully under command, would have 50. Okay, so motorized can move about 3 times as far as infantry movements in a turn. Every turn is 1 week. Every hex is 10 miles, and that hex will have certain number of movement points that it takes to move across it, and that will be based on the terrain. If it's clear, obviously that's the base, just like every other war game that's ever been made. Clear terrain is the base of one. I think it takes 2 movement points generally to move across a clear hex. But if there are rivers, if it's rough, if it has woods in it, if its road value is poor, it can cost more movement points. You always want to know how many movement points you have left. It's probably the most important thing in the game in some respects, right? Show river rail info. I keep that on. Auto air directive creation screen. We'll get to that in just a moment, but keep that turned on. Pick scenario. We'll go through that. The rest of these, they are what they are. Uh, Pick scenario. Well, you know what? Actually, let's just go back for a second. A lot of people play this game by email. You can find a very active group of people that play this War in the East and War in the Pacific by email. This is the way to do it. This is an I go, you go game. What do I mean by that? It's like a traditional board game like chess. I move my pieces in this case, not just one piece, but all of my pieces, and then you move all of your pieces. War in the Pacific is a we go game where I give my orders, you give your orders, the computer resolves them all at the same time. Not this game. It's I go, you go game. But playing this game by email is fantastic. The AI in this game is very good. It's well programmed. It knows what it should defend. That being said, there's nothing more rewarding than playing another advanced primate. So, play a human. You'll have a blast with a game like this. You'll see things, you'll say, oh my gosh, I would have never thought about a move like that. And you only get that by playing another human. Pick scenarios you can go through here. I don't even know. I don't think that I have the Torch add-on, Operation Torch, which was the DLC that came out for this. I always play just the grand campaign in these games. I hardly ever play the little scenarios. In this case, we are going to play Operation Husky because, as you can see, they even named it introductory, and they also do an air campaign one. The air campaign one is it starts in 1944. It's you're in the British Isles and you're bombing Germany, and it just is meant to show you how the air or to be an introduction to how the air war works. Okay, this Operation Husky, we start in northern Africa. We're going to try to invade Sicily. That will involve bombing the living daylights out of Sicily and then doing amphibious landings. So it teaches you several of the concepts that are different from War in the East if you had played War in the East before. If you've never played either, I'll explain to you how it works. So what is this scenario? Operation Husky, historical overview. Having spent 3 long years in the wilderness of war, British troops finally crossed the Mediterranean to assail the outward bulkhead of Hitler's fortress Europe. Unlike the past, Operation Husky is no pinprick commando raid, but a full-scale invasion. Dun dun dun. The British have come to Sicily with the American army, and they have come to stay. Ooh, strong words. I like it. The liberation of Europe has begun. Doo, 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 doo. Scenario overview. Focused entirely on Sicily, the Allied goal is to conquer the entire island as quickly as possible. Destruction of the Axis air forces should also be a major goal. The Axis goal is to delay the Allies while minimizing losses. Holding Messina at the end of the game is a must. Now, this is only 7 turns. We're going to kind of go into it and play around with it just to show concepts. And so let's go ahead and pick this one, and we'll get in here. Operation Husky, you can see maybe I've already looked at this before. You can have save folders for each different scenario. Fine, whatever. Okay, automatic error directive creation. And this is where I think some of the confusion for this game begins. And that is, I think in some ways, the Grigsby studio, Joel Billings, who's really the main creator behind these games now, I don't want to say they've shot themselves in the foot. I think just the opposite. I think what they've done is quite brilliant. But I think from people thinking the game is unapproachable, they've shot themselves a little bit in the foot. And what do I mean by that is the air war in this game can be all AI if you want it to be. You can say AI manage air and never ever think about an airplane in this game again if you don't want to. Now, that does not seem like it would be something you would want to do. If you've purchased this game or got this game otherwise and you want to play it, you probably are very interested in the Western Front of World War II. Well, the Western Front of World War II was largely decided by the air warfare. It was the first kind of war that was decided that way. The Allied bombing campaign won this front of the war. That's not to say the troops on the ground weren't valiant and they didn't do, X, Y, or Z. But the reason the Allies were able to eventually overcome the Germans mainly was because of their bombing campaign. And so to kind of skip over that part of the war would seem, I don't know, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me. If you want to, do it. I mean, just turn it over to the AI. But see, where I'm saying that I think they've shot themselves in the foot from an understanding perspective is there is this extreme, which is I'm just going to turn it to the AI. On the other end of the spectrum, you can literally get down and manage pretty much every mission your Air Force runs throughout the entire Western war. Okay. And then you have this in between. This is what I would call the in between. And I think this is where the confusion starts, which is people don't really understand where their manual control starts and the AI ends. You know, they don't know how those two things mesh together. And I wish maybe there was a little more explanation, but that's what you got me for, right? This is the in between. If we want to talk about various Netflix shows. What's the name of that show? Stranger Things, right? The in between. This is that, which is manually you set your priorities. Okay. So here for this, for Operation Husky, we're only looking at the Mediterranean. So you only see tactical air Mediterranean here. If we were playing the Grand Campaign, you would also see Northern Europe. Those are the two fronts in the Western War, is Northern Europe or northern France, really, but northern Europe and the Mediterranean. Okay, but here we've just got the Mediterranean, so let's focus on that and let's talk about tactical and strategic. Strategic is big picture, right? That's the big overall picture. Tactical is a smaller frame, a smaller window. What are we trying to do tactically in the Mediterranean? What do we want to do? Ground support, support our ground troops. Air superiority. Okay. Then you have ground attack. These are three different things. These are three different kinds of things that your Air Force can do. Um, how much of a priority do you want to give each one? Well, you can say none, low, medium, or high. Seems fairly simple, right? You look and you say ground support. So when my troops are in battle, that's what ground support is. I I want to send in, I want to make it a medium priority to assist them. Now you may say, why not turn all these up to high? Well, you've got limited number of aircraft. Not that limited. The Allies had a ton of aircraft, right? But you're just doing this relative to the other ones in some respect, right? If you put one on high, it's going to get more aircraft for that tactical objective. So air superiority. Well, we want that on high. We want our planes to have air superiority over the Axis planes over the Mediterranean. And so we're making that a very high priority, or we say we want to. Ground support, when we're in ground battles, we want to give that a medium priority. So more planes will go to air superiority, right? Ground attack is just its own, just like this, it's its own kind of bigger concept, but then you can go down and specify individual things. So you may say, well, what's the difference between ground support and ground attack? Ground support is when you're supporting troops, combat troops in battle. Ground attack is when you're going to bomb certain things. So maybe you want to bomb their airfields, right? That doesn't have anything to do with infantry attacking or defending, which is ground support. So ground attack is when we're going to offensively go out and bomb certain items that we want to get rid of on the Axis side. In this case, the computer just already set these up kind of as defaults, but it should give you a good idea of what you should be thinking about and targeting in this scenario. And when you get to the grand scenario, you can kind of take the concepts that you learned here, what's important to hit, and take it over to the grand scenario or the main scenario. So ground attack is when we're just offensively trying to hit certain items in the axis. In this case, we're saying airfields are very high priority. units, so just ground units that are out, out in the terrain, we give that a low. Railways low, port medium, ferries high, interdiction medium. We'll talk about interdiction and what exactly that is if you're not familiar. Rail yards, low. Okay, so we're just giving priorities to what we want the AI to set up the actual missions to do. And so that's why I call this the in between. We give the priorities, the AI sets up the actual missions to carry out those priorities. Now, this is on a tactical level in the Mediterranean. Strategic is a bigger idea, right? That's strategic bombing all throughout the entire Western Front. It's not just over Sicily or over the Mediterranean, it's the entire Western Front. Now, in this case, um, we're not doing any of this because none of this really makes sense to hit oil centers in Sicily. Well, they're not, aren't really any of them. This would be when you're playing the Grand Campaign and you want to hit German oil and fuel refineries inside Germany, or in Austria or in Poland even. That's what these are for, the bigger picture strategic stuff. Um, you know, V weapons, V launches, U-boats, you can kind of put priorities on these bigger concepts. But something down here that is relevant is we are going to be doing a ground attack in the south or the southern part of the theater. As you might imagine, North Africa and Sicily is in the south. And so we are going to assist that. We're putting a very high priority in assisting the ground attacks in the south. And again, then you can go in and list the ground attack types that you want to prioritize. All right. Also, amphibious landings can be supported, and we will be doing that, but you don't want to turn this on really until the turn that you're doing the amphibious attack. And we'll get into that as we get into the future episodes here. You can also go back all the way to none, just go to, everything's no. Show the screen at the start of every turn. I would say yes. This is generally how I do the air war. It's somewhat manual because you can give your priorities, and then the AI sets up the individual, what it calls air directives, um, to each of your commands, each of your fighter and bomber commands. It says, okay, player said that I have a high priority on airfields. It will set up those commands to run so many missions out to bomb airfields. All right. If you're more of a micromanager or want to be or want to get deeper in the game, and I've certainly done this before, and I'll show you how to do it as we go through this, you can go in and set up those individual air directives yourself. But this just kind of gives you an automatic way to do it. It's half manual, it's half automatic by the AI. So it's the in between. All right, let's look at the map for just a second. Now you have 5 zoom levels. This is zoomed all the way out. Whoa, that's zoomed all the way out. There we go. Let's click somewhere so I can. Oh, I can't even scroll. That's how small of a area we're on here. Operation Husky only takes place down here in the Mediterranean. Your forces are here in North Africa. I say yours, ours. This is us. Um, they're here in Northern Africa. We're going to try to go across the Strait of Sicily and land here. First of all, we're going to bomb it. We're going to prepare for an amphibious landing. We are going to look around the map, and we're going to come back next time. We're going to talk about the different tabs up here that allow you to see information. We're going to talk about each of these buttons up here on both the first bar and the second bar, what they mean, how you can use them to help you win the war, and what they all do. And so we'll do that next time when we come back. Hopefully, you're finding this helpful and you're starting to kind of get a little bit of a feel for the game. I love this game. I think you'll have a great time playing it once you just understand the basic concepts, and we'll get there through this tutorial series. So anyway, this has been Strategy Gaming Dojo. It's been a pleasure, and I'll talk to you next time.